And just note, Mendy, I don't
Yeah,
know if you'll be see this in the recording.
yeah.
My favorite cup when I want to have a hot drink, and I ought to keep it. All right.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Uh, I hope everybody is doing well. What I want to sort of open this up, so to say that this is, as we have in, what is it, about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we have the 250th anniversary of the U.S. of the Declaration of Independence, and in honor of that, and in light of that, that document sort of marks a change in history, so to speak. Nations were not made in that way, uh, with the Declaration and various other statements that went along with it. And the question is how did we get to that? Because this United States that was formed then is called Hazos Brit. I have it in a couple of Sidorim that I have where it has a prayer for the government. It's the lands. I guess there were 13. There are 13 states at them. Habris. We know what a bris is, I think. So the thing is how did that get from a our Torah, that covenant that's in our Torah, to to the founding fathers of the United States? That's the question that I will delve into. Hopefully, I have a satisfactory answer. It's actually not my answer. It's Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has he calls it the idea that changed the world. And he gets it that the book of Devarim, Sefer Devarim, when Moshe is wrapping up his life, he's about to, I don't say ride off into the wilderness or go up to Mount Nebo by the time the book is over. And what does he leave us? Well, Sefer Devarim is part of the answer that affects the rest of us. And I'll quote from Rabbi Sachs's translation. I will not do the Hebrew. And he says, "See, I have taught you decrees and laws." There's Moshe talking to Bnei Israel. "I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land you are about to enter and possess. Take care to keep them, for this will be your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the nations, who will hear about all these decrees and laws. And surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what other nation has decrees and laws as just as this Torah that I am setting before you today?" And this is just about the beginning, Parshas Eschanan, chapter 4 in Devarim. And Rabbi Sachs's next comment is, Moses believed that there would come a time when the idea of a nation founded on a covenant with God would inspire other nations with his vision of a society based not on the hierarchy of power, but on the equal dignity of all under the sovereignty and the image of God, and on the rule of justice and compassion. So that will take me to this idea that why does he tell us that he chose Avraham Avinu? He takes Avraham, we know he takes Avraham Avinu from Ur Kasdim. He seems to be the guy. There's perhaps these laws that are promulgated by God. And so far, it hasn't worked. So the plan becomes to pass this on from Avraham, and will be Yitzhak, Yaakov, and on down the line. And unfortunately, we lose a couple along the way, Yitzhak, Ishmael. But Yitzchak is the one, and it is to go on. And the covenant is supposed to be passed on. We're supposed to this sense of educating our children, passing the doctrine, the laws, tzedek, and the phrase that Hashem uses. Why did He choose Abraham? Because he would pass on the tzedek and mishport. That's the key that to the dignity and everything else. I think one time I once spoke about it. In fact, in the Torah, this is my Chumash, approved and written by I guess by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This is a Lubavitcher thing that I have, and it says well, that part that I read, the Jewish people's wisdom in the eyes of other nations. So that is, I don't know if that's what they were. I don't know personally if that's what they're saying when they refer to this idea of we're the light unto the nations, but it may be. It very well may be. And so what happened? How does this how did this work to get into the declaration? I'll sort of give you the history of it. Rabbi Sachs has many quotes here, but I'm sort of going to pass by them down. It happened. There was a invention, and there was a major invention. 1439, the Gutenberg printing press, which made books. In other words, you didn't have once they had this press, they didn't have to hand copy every book. You can have everything, and that included not only the non-Jewish books, the Jewish books, but here we're talking about the Bible. Um, and what have and the Bible sort of made it so that having a printed Bible had made it sort of took the idea away from the church itself, where the church where you had to be hear what the church told you, what the Bible said. And with the Reformation, and this helped lead to the Reformation, which led to uh, various translations of the Bible. Okay, and so with the translation of the Bible into the Bible, we tend to forget the Hebrew Bible Rabbi Sachs calls it a subversive work. Why is the Bible a subversive work? Well, we have in the beginning of Book of Exodus, we have a story about two midwives who are basically given the order, Shifra and Pua, to throw the Jewish babies, the Israeli babies, into the water, drown them, so that there'll be no, so that the Pharaoh won't be challenged. So what do Shifra and Pua do? The midwives they ignore the order of the Pharaoh, and according to this, uh, in the Geneva Bible that was printed in Geneva, there were footnotes on the side which noted this and many other things that you might say was subversive, that a king who would not want you to see, because when the Bible was eventually translated into English in the King James Version, all of those notes that might have been subversive were taken out. So that's so the somebody say something? Uh, and so that's what we have. That's the deal. And the Geneva Bible, this whole idea of the Bible, led to a whole set of called Hebraists who read the Bible. Some of them even hooked up with various rabbis and things like that, and learned to read the Torah in Hebrew, and some of them learned Gemaras, especially according to what I see here. Sanhedrin was one of their favorites. Sanhedrin tells you, gives you the framework of setting up the nation. How do you set the nation? The court system has laws that relate to the king. So there's this whole process of the Hebraeus. In fact, one of the Abarbanel, the Abarbanel, yes, that's how you say it, was the appointment of the king in Israel. That a king, and he believed, and he was the Abarbanel was a the leader of the Jewish community in Spain and later in Portugal. And both communities were expelled, and he kind of believed that. And in his reading of Sefer Shmuel, we sort of get he gives us the idea that in Sefer Shmuel that this whole thing about a king that that he was to be the king was more to be tolerated than anything else. He was not too enamored by the idea, and I guess the fact that he lived with the two kings that were going to that expelled his people, and he was offered the opportunity to stay, convert, whatever, but he decided to stay with his people. So the Barbanel became a very important voice in this whole process of developing this idea of a government, how to govern in, you might say it's how to govern in the modern world, or what it was back then. So how were you supposed to handle all of this? Well, one of the things that also comes up is that you have this idea of of an economy, of the wealth, and also, but built into our system was the idea of giving tzedakah, leaving your field, the corner of your field, making sure that the widow and the orphan were taken care of. They were and the ger, and they placed it and so that was where we were, especially the now another idea that came from our books and probably from Sanhedrin and in what is it? I think it's chapter 17 of in Devarim, I believe it's 17. It's talks about this. We see a king. We see the judge, and then we will see in the next chapter from that we see the king and the high priest. And you could argue about that there was a separation of powers between the church and the state, or the king and whatever. And then you ended up with when David has some trouble. Um, he has the prophet Natan comes in and sort of gives him advice. Okay, biggest advice was over this the whole idea of his wives. When he sends off or he off to battle. Um, basically with the intention of, I guess, the intention of having him not come back, of dying in battle. And Natan, you might say, as an advisor, could be considered also as an idea of a cabinet. He could have people to advise, and the king needed advisors. Um, so so this is these are some of the things that we see that develop help the develop thing. And as I said, the founding fathers were aware of this. There's a historic account. Um, who are the people? Who are the Christians? They were Christians who read our Bible. We could call it the Hebrew Bible, as distinguish it between the using tags like new and old. We have the Hebrew Bible. We're aware of that. And Rabbi Sachs points out that they were the Calvinists and the Puritans. And the Puritans came here. We know the Puritans came, and they were the ones who settled in New England. They were also the Calvinists up and down and the revolution was and the whole idea was saturated. In fact, for another discussion, this whole idea of the king and Shmuel was also developed by Thomas Paine, who talked about why we didn't need a king at all, and that was one of the reasons why they were fighting the war. Uh, we this is the fact that we're developing here. The idea that I'm trying to get into is that how do we get to this point where we had a country that was conceived in liberty, as Lincoln would say, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Was I was thinking it was, but anyway, and further the idea further developed. It comes from these ideas that the founding fathers in the Constitution were able to put some of this down on paper, separation of powers, the whole idea of a judge that was separate from the king, comes right out of our Bible, our Torah. Um, in fact, one of the big points that Rabbi Sachs makes in this whole discussion was he points out that and the first time I saw his his idea that changed the world, the first time I saw it was at the when it was, I believe it was at the first Trump inauguration. We said, what is Trump? What will Trump say? And the answer to the question sort of came from the idea that he was going to that the presidents historically also is part of our politics that our presidents historically in their inauguration have cited these ideas, the idea of the covenant, of the development of the power that comes from God. And Reagan was famous for saying that in the Soviet Union, he would always say that the government guarantees certain liberties and freedoms, and they were given by the government. And his answer was always, but we don't believe that here. We believe basically that our freedom and our peoplehood comes with one people under God, dedicated to the freedom that He placed in the human heart. Uh, and there are all sorts of other presidents that he has here, quotes from them. There's one use of power, and that's to serve the people. That was George Bush, I guess the second George Bush. And Bill Clinton, he has a quote from Bill Clinton in 2005. And he goes on and on with various quotes from presidents. He has one from Barack Obama. Even let it be said that by our children's children, that when we were tested, we refused to let the journey end, that we did not turn our back, or did we falter? And with eyes fixed on the horizon and God's grace upon us, we carried forth that great gift of freedom to live it safely to the future generations. And that is what that, whether I believe in his method or not, that is the key to the covenant, the covenant for us as Jews, that we are supposed to pass the torch down. That's why I guess we go so crazy when we have children and grandchildren and everything else, because we hope that they will turn around. They'll be people who will pass the torch down to the next generation. In fact, we have there's a quote from John Adams. He says, "I will insist that Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations." The irony is, of course, there is nothing like this in the political discourse. Anyway, I don't want to get I don't want to get into talking about Israel. I've been warned to stick to my topic, and my topic is that that this has happened, and I just want to. I'm not going to keep this on going on too long, but what I just want to point out what is the language that's in the Declaration of Independence that makes it that lets it be a covenant. And I'll read the part that says, in other words, one nation has its ties to another. Okay, nations, gods entitle them a decent respect to opinions, and mankind requires that they should declare causes which impel them for their separation. And in this part, the first part here, while the Declaration is in part a long indictment of King George III, there's the important part that relates to what I'm discussing here. That they're endowed by their crew that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Okay, then he talks about government, and the thing that probably brings us close. In other words, that's the covenant with Hashem. The other part that in all covenant usually seems to pop up, and is an important part of it, is this final last line of the Declaration, and for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, and we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. In other words, when you have a covenant, what does the covenant mean? As I said, we're passing on to the next generation. That's what the covenant. But it also means that in the process of doing that, we are together. Now, of course, I don't argue that Jews don't agree on anything, but we do agree on some basic principles. And on that idea that we at least try to sort of stick together and to move on. We'll have our Seder to talk about our covenant. When do we talk about the covenant? Talk about our covenant when we sit down on Passover for a Seder. Our covenant was a part. The whole idea of the covenant was part of the slaves and the civil rights movement that happened in this country. They took their strength from our book. It's sort of like the eternal story that anybody could look for to have it, to develop the freedom of the country. Freedom and liberty, tzedek and mishpat. Those are the two concepts that sort of go together. That Hashem chose Abraham, and that's what we should be striving even today to pass on to the next generation. Anyway, that's the covenant and the declaration. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Beautiful.
Sam, thank
Any
you.
Nice.
comments?
Thank
Any
you,
Nice to
comments?
Sam.
Questions?
Sam,
Have a
Any
good
comments?
Shabbos.
Questions? What?
Thank you and have a good Shabbos.
Thank you and have
You
a good
too.
Shabbos.
Good shot. Shabbat shalom. Who's that? Janosch?
Yes, it's me.
It is a Janosch man from Poland. You in Poland?
Yes, I'm in Poland.
Thank you.
Good job, Sam. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good
Sam, thank you
Shabbos,
so much, Sam.
everybody.
Good Shabbos,
I'm good.
everybody.
I'm glad to be able to do it.
Okay,
It was
thank
Very
you.
nice.
And have a good
Amen.
Shabbos, everybody.
Thank you,
Shabbat
Sam.
shalom. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank you,
Sam,
Mendy.
Yes.
Sam, where do you know Shlomo Tzadok from?
Shlomo who?
Sadok.
Sadok.
Shlomo?
Sadok.
Sadok.
Oh, who? How do I know him? Who is he?
I don't know. You sent him a birthday greeting on Facebook.
I don't know. There's, how many people I know?
Listen.
actually know.
I know like 200 people what I didn't see, and I send
I don't know.
the happy birthday greetings.
Something.